On a bitterly cold December night in the outskirts of Milwaukee, I was driving home from a late shift at the hospital. The roads were nearly deserted, the only sound being the crunch of snow under my tires and the howling wind that seemed to seep into the bones. I was used to the harsh Wisconsin winters, but that night, the cold felt more biting and more unforgiving. The snow had started to fall in, thick flakes blurring my vision. I turned up the heater in my old sedan, the warm air doing little to ease the chill that had settled inside. As I drove through the winding, snow-covered roads, I noticed something unusual. A car, half buried in snow, off to the side of the road. It was an older model, its hazard lights blinking weakly through the snowfall. I slowed down, debating whether to stop. It was late, and the temperature was well below freezing. If someone was in there, they could be in real trouble. I pulled over, my headlights illuminating the stranded car. I grabbed my coat and flashlight, bracing myself against the biting cold as I stepped out. The wind cut through me, and I hurried over to the car. Peering inside, I saw a figure slumped over the steering wheel. My heart raced as I knocked on the window, but there was no response. I tried the door. It was unlocked. The man inside was unconscious, his skin pale and cold to the touch. I checked for a pulse. It was there, but weak. I knew I had to get him out of there. I managed to rouse him enough to help him into my car. He was mumbling incoherently, his words lost in the howling wind. I turned my car around, heading back to the hospital. The man was shivering violently, his condition worsening. I tried to keep him awake, talking to him, but he slipped in and out of consciousness. The drive seemed to stretch on forever, the snow turning into a blizzard. I was worried we wouldn't make it in time, but finally the lights of the hospital came into view, a beacon of hope in the relentless storm. I rushed into the emergency room, where he was immediately taken in for treatment. I later learned that he had severe hypothermia, and if he had been out there any longer, he may not have made it. The man, whose name was David, had been on his way home from visiting family when his car broke down. He had tried to call for help, but his phone had died, and the cold had quickly overcome him. David recovered fully, and he had thanked me for saving his life. I was just glad I had been at the right place at the right time. That night stayed with me, a stark reminder of the mercilessness of the winter and the fragility of life. It also reminded me of the importance of compassion and helping others, even when it's not convenient. Every time I drive on that road in the winter, I think of that night and of David and the thin line between life and death. It was a night that changed my perspective, a night that showed me the true meaning of being a lifeline in the freezing cold of the Midwest winter. On a frigid December night in Midtown Manhattan, the city that never sleeps showed me a side that I wish I'd never encountered. I was working late at my office, a tech startup near Times Square. The streets were bustling with tourists and late-night shoppers, the bright lights of the billboards casting an artificial day over the city. I finally left the office around midnight, the winter chill biting through my coat as I stepped onto the street. The crowds had thinned, but the city was far from quiet. I decided to walk a few blocks to clear my head before catching the subway home. As I walked, I noticed a man following me. He was tall, wearing a long, dark coat and a hat pulled low over his face. At first, I thought he was just another pedestrian, but every turn I took, he was there, keeping a steady pace behind me. A sense of unease crept over me. I quickened my pace, my heart starting to race. I didn't want to lead the stranger to my apartment, so I decided to head towards a busier street, hoping to lose him in the crowd. But he kept following, getting closer with each step. I could see his breath in the cold air, a cloud of vapor that seemed to hang in the night. I was just about to break into a run when he suddenly called out, "Hey, wait!" His voice was deep, and there was an urgency to his tone. I stopped, against my better judgment, and turned to face him. "How can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He stepped closer and I braced myself, but then he reached into his coat and instead of a weapon, he pulled out a wallet. "You dropped this back there," he said, handing it to me. I was taken aback. It was my wallet, which I hadn't even realized was missing. I must have dropped it when I left the office. "Thank you," I stammered, feeling a mix of relief and embarrassment. He nodded and turned to walk away. I watched him disappear into the night, feeling foolish for having been so paranoid. But as I continued my walk, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. I reached the subway and headed home, my mind racing. When I got back to my apartment, I opened my wallet just to make sure everything was there. That's when I noticed it, a note tucked inside of the pockets. The note was short, just a few words, but it sent a chill down my spine. "You're welcome. Be more careful next time." I stood there, the note in my hand, a sense of dread washing over me. The man hadn't just happened to find my wallet. He had been watching me, close enough to pick it up without me noticing. I didn't sleep much that night, the events replaying in my mind. The city felt different to me after that. The crowds, the lights, the constant movement, it all seemed to hide a darker and more sinister side. I became more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. That encounter was a stark reminder that even in a city filled with people, you can never be too sure who's watching or who's just a step behind you. It was a December night in my small town in upstate New York, the kind where the snow falls so thick you can barely see the house across the street. I was home alone, my family having traveled to visit relatives for the holidays. I had stayed behind due to work commitments. The blizzard had been raging since the afternoon, and by nightfall, it had turned into a whiteout. I was curled up on the couch, a book in hand, the fireplace crackling, when I heard a knock at the door. It was odd, given the severity of the storm. Who would be out on a night like this? I opened the door to find a man standing on my porch, snow covering his coat. He was shivering, his face pale from the cold. "My car broke down a few blocks away. Can I use your phone to call for a tow?" he asked, his voice trembling. Something about him seemed off. His eyes darted around nervously, not meeting mine. But the blizzard was fierce, and I couldn't leave him out in the cold, so I let him in, pointing him towards the phone in the living room. As he made the call, I watched him closely. He was fidgety, glancing at the windows and at the doors. After he hung up, he thanked me and said the tow truck would be there in about an hour. He asked if he could wait inside until then. I agreed, albeit reluctantly. We sat in the living room making small talk. He said his name was Tom and that he was just passing through town, but his answers were vague, and he kept changing the subject whenever I asked about where he was headed. As time passed, I grew more uneasy. He seemed too interested in the layout of my house, his gaze lingering on the hallway leading to the bedrooms. I decided to confront him. "It's been over an hour. Shouldn't your tow truck be here by now?" He stiffened and then stood up abruptly. "Actually, I need to use your bathroom," he said, heading down the hallway. I followed at a distance, my instincts on high alert. When he entered the bathroom, I quickly moved to the front door to lock it. That's when I noticed his footprints in the snow leading up to my house. They were alone, no car tracks in sight. I realized then that he had lied. There was no broken down car. He was here for another reason. Panic set in. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but before I could dial, the lights went out. The blizzard had knocked out the power. I heard him emerge from the bathroom, moving stealthily in the dark. I knew I had to defend myself, so I quietly made my way into the kitchen, where I kept a baseball bat. In the pitch-black darkness, I could hear him moving around, searching. I stayed hidden, my grip on the bat tightening. Then, I heard him near the kitchen. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. As he entered, I swung the bat with all my might, connecting with a thud. He cried out, falling to the floor. I didn't stop to check on him. I ran to a neighbor's house, pounding on their door until they let me in. The police arrived shortly after. They found the man unconscious in my kitchen. He had a knife and a rope in his coat. It turned out that he was wanted in several states for burglary and assault. That night changed me. I no longer felt safe in my neighborhood. The blizzard had brought more than just the snow. It had brought a predator to my doorstep. I learned the hard way that not every stranger seeking help is who they seem to be. From then on, I was more cautious and suspicious. The memory of that night, the fear, and the fight for survival in the darkness of a blizzard stayed with me. A chilling reminder of the dangers that can lurk just outside our doors.